In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is the end of diplomacy. 35 minutes. That's all, Marco.
And good morning, and let's see, good evening, and maybe good afternoon to our guests, our audience. So I was thinking about the theme, Larry and Yelena, today. Yelena and I were discussing about how you go through quite emotional turns with what's going on in the world, and of course, life just happening. But I thought of this theme of the death of empire, and part of this is because I was reading some of the other articles on your website, Larry. Death of empire. One of the articles on your website really got my attention. It was Persia, the graveyard of empires. And normally it is Afghanistan that is known as the graveyard of empires.
Right.
And historically, great powers have invaded Afghanistan, and they can't maintain that stable long-term rule. But the article goes through really Persia and why it matters there. On top of that, the 40 days to force Russia to the negotiating table has failed miserably, and now Russia is stating clearly there's not going to be a ceasefire in Ukraine. And that is while we see one gas station in Ukraine going up in flames. Some say it's over 400. The Japanese, the British, they're the largest creditors to the United States, but we're trying to figure out, bailing them out. Scott Bessent, who's, the great George Soros expert. He's now talking about a new Bretton Woods. I think that's fake. And then today, really this couple weeks, the president is, he's got all these things on his website about a nuclear revival or an industrial revolution. But at the same time, it's like he can't decide because his administration is trying to lower the threshold for tactical nuclear weapons. Today, he was threatening the government of Oman. He's threatening to bomb Oman if they get in the way. So really, Larry, there's so many things going, and I didn't really know where to start, but this concept of the death of empire, and which your website really got my attention on.
Sure.
What do you think? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, yeah, no. So we are witnessing the death. Let's call it the death of the Western Empire, the one that the United States sits atop of. We've like the classical empires. Go back to Roman, the Greek. Their collapse came not from outside, not from exterior enemies, but from within. They rotted from within, and then they collapsed when pressure from outside was applied. And boy, we are seeing that rot start to crop up everywhere within the U.S., let's call it foreign national security policy front. First off, we've got Bessent threatening, he's launched Operation Economic Fury, the follow-up to Epic Fury against Iran, thinking, oh my God, we're going to crush Iran. We're going to show them who's boss, because we got the dollar. Well, and I wrote an article last night. And I will say it's one of the better ones I've ever done. that goes into this in depth. That it's one thing to go apply sanctions when your currency actually is the global currency, but it's another thing to try to apply those sanctions and coerce and bully others when your currency is sliding out of favor.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's much longer than what I normally do, about 2,500 words, but it really, integrates several different aspects. And here's the bottom line. Bessent basically says he's going to create an economic wall around Iran and prevent it. So it will have to come begging to the United States because Iran's economy is in such desperate straits. And it's like he's like some prehistoric bug frozen in amber. He thinks the world is as it was 20 years ago. But what's happened, particularly in the last a transformation in the last 11 years, go back to 2015 when the JCPOA was signed. At that time, Russia and China signed on to the sanctions that were levied on Iran. Iran was isolated economically, politically. It didn't have some great benefactor standing outside saying, hey, we got your back, ignore those Americans. So Iran was really caught in a bind. And what does Donald Trump do? When Trump comes in, pulls out of the JCPOA, basically dumps it. He ended up opening a door for Iran that frankly has made Iran capable of doing what it's doing today in terms of kicking the United States in the ass. Almost within a month or two of pulling out of the JCPOA, and I think it was in May of 2018. So by July of 2018, Russia, China, and Iran started planning a joint military naval exercise, one that ultimately was carried out, I think, in December of 2019. It's important to understand that these exercises are planned 12 to 18 months in advance. So right off the bat, Russia and China were starting to acknowledge Iran. Then we get the start of the war in Ukraine and the sanctions levied on Russia, the exclusion of Russia from SWIFT, and then threatened sanctions as well on China. And basically the Chinese and Russians say, screw this. We're not going to stay in this system where the United States can hold a dollar gun to our head.
Exactly.
And seize our assets. No, that's going to stop. So they began the creation of an alternative financial network really began in earnest in 2022. And even though China had they established back in 2015 something called the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS, as an alternative to SWIFT. It really came into its own in 2024. So now when China is trading with, let's say, Brazil for buying soybeans and coffee, Brazil pays in Chinese renminbi, and so it's all outside the dollar sphere. So here's Bessent now threatening, we're going to sanction Iran like it's never been sanctioned. And Iran's going, we're not dealing in dollars anymore. We're dealing in Russian rubles, Chinese renminbi. When they sell their oil, they're not touching dollars. They're dealing with Chinese banks, Chinese currency. And the Chinese currency now is actually backed by gold. China has been buying up just a ton of gold around the world, and particularly from the United States. So here is Iran that in 2015 was isolated. Now it's got an open trade route with Russia through the Caspian Sea. It's got an open trade route with China through the east-west, what's called the New Silk Road after the old Silk Road, but there's a railroad line that runs from China to Iran, and then you got the air bridge from air traffic. And then Pakistan itself opened up 6 land routes. So basically, Besant's threatening to try to isolate Iran when Iran's got plenty of open doors. It doesn't have to just go out through the Gulf. It's not dependent upon the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. It can control the Strait of Hormuz. That's a whole nother issue. But in terms of its economy and trade, yeah, it's under some pressure. But I tell you what, it's not under. It's the pressure on it today doesn't compare with what it was 11 years ago, when they had no friends, when they had no economic options. And so this is just one example where the United States is pursuing a policy that's disconnected from reality. And Besant is, I guess he's oblivious to this. At the same time, we're witnessing this cascade effect on our military and national security. We got a shortage of weapons. And without delving too deep into it, and basically, to make it simple, all 78% of those weapon systems produced by the Department of War / Department of Defense rely upon rare earth minerals out of China, and China has cut off that supply of 5 rare earth minerals. Therefore, we can offer to spend as much money as we want. We can't build the damn weapons because we don't have the key ingredients. This ain't complicated. Then on the military front, we're going to blockade Iran. Really? With what ships? Because right now, what we're seeing is across the Navy, not just on the U.S. Abraham Lincoln, across the Navy, there are serious supply shortages. And this is structural, because in the about 10, 11 years ago, apparently it was during the Obama administration, some genius decided, hey, those fast combat supply ships we got, well, let's cut them in half. We don't need those. So all of a sudden, for servicing the entire world, we got 2 fast combat supply ships now. We used to have 4. And so what happens? So now those ships that normally would provide food, fresh food, toiletry items, it was sort of hilarious the other day. They're complaining that the female sailors on the USS Boxer were out of sanitary items. So they said that we've got a Kotex shortage. And
another ship has also started to have problems as well.
It's not just one more. I mean, it's all of them, because I've been in contact with 3 pissed off mothers. One mother, sailor's son, was on the Tripoli. He lost 30 pounds. She sent me the photographs and the text messages. So this wasn't some fantasy. I mean, it was real. Another mother whose son just came off a submarine tour. Same thing. Substantial loss of weight because of inadequate food, insufficient supplies of food. And then the mother off of the USS Boxer, whose son is a Marine. Same story. These women don't know each other, but they all have the same damn. When you get 3 different sources from 3 different ships, all telling you the same story, it's not unique to the ship. Mm-hmm. Then on top of it, and so it's both the loss of those fast combat supply ships, coupled with the warehouses that were supposed to provide the supplies. They've been blown up. They were in Bahrain and in United Arab Emirates. So now we're down there. So this means Trump can talk all he wants about a blockade wall of steel, and it's just bullshit, because we don't have the ships actually to do it. They can stop some, but it's not an actual severe shutdown of the Iranian economy. And then moving beyond the Navy, within the military, there is a suicide crisis. Last November, Secretary of Army Dan Driscoll issued a memo ordering, not suggesting, ordering all officers and non-commissioned officers to have a daily check-in with every one of their soldiers. Give them a call out and say, hey, Ryan, how you doing today, man? You feeling okay? Everything okay? I just want to check, Why are they doing that? Because too many people were killing themselves. And we saw just in June, out of the Cyber Command at Fort Meade, they said they had at least 5 suicides in a month, and it was concerning. So what we're witnessing is a level of incompetence, failure to manage, failure to lead, overstressing the systems. And instead of the United States sort of pulling back and trying to figure out what's going on, we keep doubling down on stupid.
Actually, I have a follow-up questions, but it's more of in financial sphere, of course, and it's about AML, CTF policies that were applied. And initially, of course, I want to believe that it was created to make our world a safer place and better place, and really to prevent money laundering. But as we see, it has turned into actually tool of surveillance for the states to see how they move assets around and how they move money around. So, Larry, how do you see the future of this AML policies? Because they anyway, they are required somehow, but with new parallel systems that China has created and Russia has created, wouldn't this FAT, Financial Action Task Force, be used just to counter the countries that no longer want to be part of SWIFT or who want to be in the same system with China? So may this mechanism be misused to pressure the countries not to use Chinese created system?
Okay, I missed the start of your question. Which system were you referring to?
I was referring to all the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, that FATF, Gafi,
so you're talking about FATF and
yes,
such.
Yes. So can this tool be misused by the Western governments to scare away the countries from using Chinese created system, Chinese and Russia created system?
Look, when it comes to money laundering, most of the government efforts on this are cosmetic. They're not serious. So my company Berg Associates, what we did, we did money laundering investigations. In fact, my partner John Moynihan and I, we're the only non-U.S. government people mentioned in a 2006 government publication on money laundering. Because we had discovered a money laundering technique that the government didn't know about. So, and the reason I say the government really, they talk tough about, we're going to crack down on terrorist financing, money laundering, etc. But they don't do much to actually stop it because it's very profitable, particularly for banks. A lot of people equate money laundering with fraud, and they're completely different things. In fraud, somebody's trying to take money from you, and you're going to wind up poor. In a money laundering scheme, you're going to make money. You're going to wind up with more money than you may have counted on. The essence of money laundering is the cash always starts with derived from some illegal activity. And so then how's it going to move through the system? So my point is that China, whatever even alternative financial systems the Russians and Chinese are setting up, they're going to be equally susceptible to that. It is the governments almost institutionally profit from this. The very first case we worked on in Berg Associates was called the Bank of New York Russian money laundering case back in 1998.
Wow.
I've got sitting over here at about 4 or 5 feet from me, I got all the Russian bank files on CD-ROMs. In that case, usually you've got collaborators inside banks that work with criminal organizations outside, and it's quite lucrative. Example. I was working for a bank in Panama called Credit Corp, and they were doing e-commerce, and so they had this. They got in contact with me and said, "We got this new client. They're selling soap online. They're moving quite a bit of money. Would you check them out?" And I said, "Okay." So I said, "Send me all of their credit card transactions." And it took me a bit to figure out that what I was looking at was not a conventional credit card, but these were debit cards. And they were debit cards from one bank that was in southeast Texas, right on the border with Mexico. And so I started looking at the transactions. And so this company was owned by a Ukrainian and a Spaniard. But they were then operating in Panama, which is, normal. And so I started looking at the transactions, and the transactions were $75, $140, $75, then $150. They were like what's called structuring. They weren't random. They were very much like they had set up an algorithm to this car to purchase this much, this car to purchase that much. So I started calling the people. I had their names. And this goes back to know your customer, what we're talking about, the anti-money laundering requirements. I had the customer's name, customer's address, social security number, date of birth, phone number. So I thought, well, I started calling these people at random, claiming that I was the customer service rep for the soap online company. And the first person I called was a woman. She initially didn't answer, and then she called me back and basically started yelling at me like, "Why are you using my married name? I've been divorced 4 years." I go, "Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry." Had to apologize. I explained I was the customer service rep for the soap online company. Just want to make sure she was happy with her purchase. And she goes, "What purchase?" And then I began discovering that on every one of these know your customer issues with name, address, phone number, date of birth, there was always one piece of data that was wrong. Everything else was accurate, but one thing was wrong. Sometimes it'd be the address, sometimes the phone number. So quickly discovered that these people had debit cards. Well, what we figured out was this Ukrainian and Spaniard were involved with drug trafficking. They'd gone into this bank in Texas. They'd gone to the manager and said, "Hey, we need to purchase $2 million worth of debit cards. Here are our clients." So from the bank standpoint, hey, we got the know your customer. They get the, and this was all stuff that had been lifted off the dark web, identity theft. But the beauty of it wasn't hurting these people in terms of their credit rating or anything because they're debit cards. So guy says, "Well, give us $2 million worth of debit cards, and we'll give you guys, we'll buy them for $2.2 million. So the bank says, "Oh, we're going to make 10% off of this transaction." Cool. Sold it. So then these guys would then charge the debit cards according to the algorithm, $7,500. And so the every month, $70,000, or every 2 weeks, $70,000 was getting dumped into this credit core account. And then they got instructions to wire it to a bank in Cyprus, and then whoosh, off into the Ethernet. Now, going through this detailed story, it's just to highlight, this is just one type of way people can launder money. They're incredible. The creativity, the possibilities are endless. And many times government finds it more lucrative to allow this activity to go on. I mean, we had lined up the government of Mexico as a client to go after Wachovia Bank for money laundering because they had laundered $300 billion or something. I forget the number. It was off the charts. And when we got down to Mexico to meet with the government, Eric Holder had called and threatened the government of Mexico that if you do this, if you work with these guys, we're going to impose these sanctions. Mexican government scared them off. So, long answer to your question, Lena, but this as long as there are government incentives for people to avoid taxes, people to not be able to use drugs, alcohol, whatever, there's going to be money laundering because there's going to be proceeds from all of these criminal activities, and they'll use the existing financial networks. The one they're not really going to use, though, is the crypto because of blockchain. The problem with blockchain is it creates an audit trail.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad Yelena went down this bit of a rabbit hole because you have Russia with their A7 system. This was in the Wall Street Journal about how this 2-year-old system using the A7, A5 currency. Now, this is due to sanctions, right? The sanctions have actually forced countries to come up with these alternatives, as you've been now describing. And specifically, the A7 system is based on the A7, A5, which is a ruble-backed stablecoin, but it goes through the Tether, U.S. Tether system. And of course, it can't sit there long because they work with the government. Just like, it's interesting because everything with cryptocurrency was supposed to be hidden and masked. But this is simply because any of these countries that are considered threats to the Western financial system, they need to have some way of payments. And so it seems like, once again, sanctions have forced some very interesting innovations. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular A7 system.
Yeah, actually, I'd read about it. Actually, I heard about it. Kevin, was it Kevin Wamsley?
I know he's talked about it for sure.
Yeah, Inside China Business. I think he talked about it the other day. Yeah, this is the founders of the United States, when they wrote the Constitution, they understood human nature, how government actions will elicit reactions by individual citizens, and the things that you think are designed to prevent one activity actually end up encouraging that activity. And that's what our modern lawmakers don't understand or seem to have forgotten. So they think, we're going to impose these sanctions, not thinking that people will figure out ways to avoid those sanctions and to work around it.
I agree with you. It seems to me that it's more than that. It's because these are nation states. These aren't just like drug dealers who are going to avoid the law. You were going through the Belt and Road, and I found this map of what they're calling now the Ice Silk Road, which has recently opened up between China and Europe. Russia and China, under sanctions, they've accelerated the production of domestic aircraft, for example. I was reading this Chinese-American scholar, Einar Tangen, and this particular article, Larry, if you have not read this, it is really an eye-opening article, because he says in there that one of the problems in the West that they just don't get, they look at the AI, they look at the EVs, they look at the semiconductors, which he calls the visible peaks of the breakthroughs. What is it? This is the frontier technologies. But he says what people don't get are the things you've mentioned, like the materials, the precious metals. But let's also talk about ball bearings and every kind of bearing and fastener and all of these intermediate industries that make all of that even possible. And he wrote the article talking about how if the United States and the West want to rebuild, this is what they need to be thinking about.
Right.
And this is what I wanted to your previous comment about the sanctions and going around. These are nation states who are saying, well, we're not going to let your global empire prevent our sovereign nation state from doing what it needs to do. What do you say to that?
Oh, yeah. Look, it's almost as if we have a strategy to alienate and isolate ourselves. I guess the temptation is when you have power over people or over countries, or are able to really influence major events, there is a temptation to take it too far. And what I mean by taking it too far is, let's just two recent examples. Look at what Trump did yesterday with Oman. He threatened to bomb Oman.
It's incredible.
Now, Oman has been considered a friend of the United States.
That's right.
Oman was playing the role as mediator between the United States and Iran just 2 days prior to the start of the war on February 28th. In fact, I can't remember if it was the foreign minister or the leading sheikh out of Oman that came to the United States to meet with Trump to report on the progress they thought they had made that week during talks between the United States, between Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and the Iranian delegation. And then, the United States launches the attack. So now here's Trump threatening Oman. Well, if you're the Omani leaders, you're looking at Trump like some toxic romantic partner. Whether it's your crazy girlfriend or crazy boyfriend, you're going, that person's nuts. I'm not going to stay in this relationship. He or she will stab me to death in the dark. And so Oman starts looking to alternatives. And the same that happened once they thought, oh, we're gonna show Russia, we're gonna cut them off from SWIFT. That way they can't move any money internationally. Well, they still got to move money, and they figured a way out. And once they do that, all of a sudden, not using SWIFT anymore. SWIFT transactions are actually starting to go down. Transactions with SIPs and the Chinese are going up. And as you just pointed out in that other article, Russia's also figured out some ways to use stable coins to move money and stay outside of the control of the U.S. financial structure. Well, when other countries, when your country is based entirely now upon the petrodollar, the fact that people will use your currency to buy everything they need, and they will happily lend you money by buying your bonds, and then therefore you can continue spending like a drunken sailor on Liberty and Manila, then life is good. But when that gravy train dries up, when the people say, you know what, we don't want to buy your bonds, which is being said, we're going to buy gold instead. We're not going to sell our goods in dollars. We're going to price it in Chinese currency or in Russian currency. Then all of a sudden, here's the United States, which is still spending at this enormous rate. We're now $40 trillion in debt.
I mean, I thought it was just the other day, it was 33 trillion. So that number is moving very quickly.
When Trump took office, it was 37 trillion, 18 months ago.
There you go.
He's added $3 trillion in 18 months.
It's crazy.
I mean, we've never seen anything like it. And so at the very time when we are boosting our debt tremendously, that the rest of the world is growing unenthusiastic, let's put it that way, about using U.S. dollars, which then the weakening of the dollar and people unwilling to hold it or engage in those transactions, again, reduces our influence. We're no longer the wealthiest guy at the table. We're sort of the guy that has to maybe take a loan out in order to pay for the dinner bill. So this is, and it'd be one thing if that was just that on the financial side, but as we discussed earlier, we're seeing it within our military infrastructure. We're seeing it within the weapons. So we're seeing it on a variety of fronts that the power of the United States once wielded it's collapsing. And this is where we go back to the empire question. We are an empire in decline. And unfortunately, one thing that happens in those empires is they engage in warfare, which further accelerates their decline.
And Larry, I wanted to ask, what do you think about Europe? Is Europe going down together with the United States? Because recently I have read an article that, as if, I don't know to how much extent this is true, but it was said that Trump's administration demanded every European country to write down like a report on how much they support Donald Trump administration as such, its decisions, and how much they spend on buying the American weapons. So all the countries in Europe must really submit the paper. So we are supporting Trump to that extent. And secondly, these were the tariffs that were again imposed on EU. It's 10% and 12.5% on Norway specifically. And what were the rumors that Americans want Norwegians to employ the state pension fund to support the United States. To what extent all of that can be true? Can you please comment on that?
Well, yeah, as bad as the situation is for the United States in terms of loss of empire, the decline of the empire, it's worse for Europe. They're leading the way down into the black hole. You look at how Europe has transformed in the last 110 years. So 110 years ago, Europe was, the Brits, the Germans, the French, they were considered bona fide world powers. In fact, they sort of looked down their nose on the United States. It's just this rude, ambitious country. It's big, but they're nothing. Because the centers of finance was in London. They controlled vast territories in Africa and Asia. They were industrial powers, leading industrial powers. Now look at them. It's sort of like that. What happened in Game of Thrones, when they talked about there was a time when the kingdoms had these big giant dragons, and then at the end, the dragons shrunk to the size of like a Mexican Chihuahua or a tiny poodle, not at all threatening, could be a nuisance if they're an obnoxious enough critter. That's what Europe is now. Europe is basically impotent. They're militarily impotent. They're economically impotent, but they've still got enough industrial capability to create weapons that can cause some mayhem, but nothing that can be decisive in terms, changing a picture militarily. So, it has been the U.S. dollar, not the European, not the euro, that's dominated. And Scott Bessent sent that message loud and clear. Was it 2 weeks ago now when he did the bailout for Japan and just took the euros like, you can't tell me what to do.
Interesting you bring both of those things up. Recently, 3 hours ago, actually, President Putin warned Britain of consequences over the drones that they're supplying to Ukraine. This is basically a few days after Russia was seeking explanation from both the U.S. and Turkey for supplying new weapons to Ukraine. Why are we taking things out of Turkey and moving them over there? So in terms of these things that you're saying, also, the Chinese have a new anti-drone technology, which you might have heard about, where they can basically cause huge numbers of them just to drop out of the sky. So It does seem, by the way, people tend to forget this. Like, why doesn't Russia escalate? I see escalation everywhere.
Yeah. No, they've been on a tear for the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks. They've completely shut down the Black Sea, Odessa, Nikolaev, the main ports on the Black Sea, and then there are a couple others up the River Danube that have been shut down. There's no more maritime traffic going in, coming out. Almost every major manufacturing site in Kyiv has been destroyed, and again, the Russians aren't letting up night after night after night. And then on the ground, they've opened up significant gaps in the Ukrainian line. So the war, in terms of the momentum for the Russians, is accelerating day after day, despite Western propaganda that tries to argue the exact opposite. Again, this is the craziest damn thing I've ever seen. A commitment to a delusional narrative is the only way I can describe it. And, they pretend, well, it's like we're seeing the same phenomena with Trump in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Strait of Hormuz is open. We control it. And meanwhile, you can go look at the maps, vesselfinder.com, marinetraffic.com. You're not seeing any movement of ships other than the ones that are moving through the Iranian side of the strait.
There was a comical statement by, I think it was the Foreign Ministry of Iran, where they said that the Strait of Hormuz has been open since the time of Adam and Eve, all the way until February 28th, 2026.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned Japan. What's going on with Japan? Because suddenly Japan has decided to, I don't know, cause trouble for itself with Russia also.
Yeah, they forgot that they lost World War II and that the Russians took Kuril Islands and they've held it. That, they want it fair and square. The Japanese government as a whole, this is probably, I think, a reaction to its declining economic fortunes. And despite the rescue package that Bessent instituted 2 weeks ago, they're going to have to do it again, maybe this week, maybe next week, which is going to further, we're going to see more pressure on the dollar. We're building up to a major financial crisis, and Japan may very well be the trigger for it. So in that context, sometimes if you're trying to distract your local population from the economic woes, pick a fight with the Russians. That'll, try to appeal to nationalism on that front. But you saw yesterday, Lavrov, he was some kind of pissed off.
Yeah.
And he called the Japanese ambassador in and basically, I think, gave him a good old-fashioned ass chewing, because the Japanese ambassador came out looking a little chagrined after his meeting with Mr. Lavrov.
Absolutely. That was, in fact, I think Maria Zakharova, she had made some comments about that. But, there are, just back on Japan again, I mean, I think also President Putin is right. NATO is trying to seep into Asia. And you have all of these, the Japan, Philippines, U.S., alliance, they call it, I think that's the JAFAS. Quad is something, I forget what that one stands for. AGIS is the Australia, Japan, US. All of these military political task forces that are really elements of NATO. But remember, wasn't it recently, and I'm thinking about this too in these bigger contexts. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff moving, but didn't the Ukrainians just defeat NATO forces in a
exercise? There was a military exercise, and I guess the U.S. was trying to basically use 20th century tactics in moving both massing forces and moving forces forward. and they got their ass handed to them by Ukrainian drone operators. The Ukrainians are not incompetent. They're ideologically toxic in terms of embracing Nazism and that kind of thing. But they're not a military force to be ignored. They're probably the best fighters within the NATO countries, even though they're not considered part of NATO. But for all practical purposes, they've been a de facto member of NATO.
Yeah.
It was a bit of again, just one other reminder of the weakness, the inadequacy of the U.S. military.
Wow. Yelena, you look like you're about to say something.
No, I just wanted to make a small commentary, and I think that Larry would agree with that, one of the objectives of turning Ukrainians against Russians was, to make Slavs fight Slavs. Or was it the plan?
Yeah. Just you get Slav fighting Slav, Arab fighting Arab, Muslim fighting Muslim, etc. There's one way to get rid of those people.
Back to some of these thematic questions. It does seem recently the Chinese had put out a proposal, and I say recently, it could have been, it's within the last full year, a concept paper on a global governance initiative. I know that all of my friends, they get very worried when they hear the word global, they hear the word governance put together. But in that, they're really suggesting a completely new arrangement in relations between countries. And the reason this came up in my mind is that when we talked recently, you said, let's talk the term multinodal, not multipolar. So that's
right.
what I was thinking about, because again, magnets, poles repel each other. You were really not thinking in that sense. And I think it's important to come back to that concept, that first and foremost, a system of sovereign nation states, which, maybe we had a chance at the end of World War II, and then FDR died and Truman came in and things changed. But they've gone through this, and I shared this with some of my Russian friends, and they said, well, this is totally in keeping with our doctrine as well. So I guess my question at this point to you, let's also say, you're a firearms instructor, you have a pulse on the Constitution, the Second Amendment. How do we get Americans to think back to this constitutional way of thinking from 250 years ago, as opposed to seeing always these outside threats, and therefore rally behind the latest, harebrained idea of, oh, it's Russia, oh, it's China, it's, even the Democrat versus Republican thing. I mean, that's starting to get old too, because people seem to be missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, well, it's I call it the magician's shiny object trick, where, they'll sit there and go, hey, look here, pay attention to this. Communism, international communist conspiracy, international terrorism, that's the Nazis are coming. Drug you always pick up some external threat to distract public attention away from, well, is your government actually serving your needs? Are children being educated, or are children being indoctrinated with all sorts of weird, social practices like transgenderism, etc.? Is healthcare available, or do you basically have to go bankrupt you and your family in order to obtain basic health care? Certain fundamental things, and people say, "Oh, you're arguing socialism." No, I'm not. What I'm talking about is create a government that works for the people that is supposed to serve, not that it treats the people like they're servants who have to, obey, bow before it, and with Donald Trump clapping his hands, wiper, come wipe my ass, that kind of thing. No, we need to get back to the accountability that should be built into the system. And, that is the one thing that the United States keeps getting distracted with, these foreign threats, these foreign wars, and refuses to fix itself at home. And it's the failure to fix itself at home. It's ultimately what's going to destroy this country. It's already severely deteriorated. But it's not beyond recovery. And that's where I look at the example. That's why Russia is such an important example today of how a society can be transformed from this sclerotic Soviet government that collapses in 1991, and the Russian people suffered hell in the next 10 years coming out of that. But what they have today is something remarkable. It's where nationalism thrives, where the welfare of the people is they're taken care. It's not where the government controls their lives and they're taken care of, but that actually has created an opportunity for people to grow, to excel. Let's call it a return to meritocracy within a Russian society. Whereas what we've seen in the United States is it's gone just the opposite. We're going the route of the old Soviet Union, where it ain't meritocracy. Who's your mom? Who's your dad? Do you have the right blood lineage? Are you connected to the right people? You get favors that are not available to the average American, as an example. So that's so I think the United States can recapture that, but I fear it also. It's going to take a catastrophe similar to what Russia had to go through between 1991 and 2000, in which the average lifespan of men fell because of suicides, drug addiction, criminal activity soared. Society fell into real chaos, and then order had to come back, and it ultimately was restored.
May I ask a question to both of you regarding healthcare in the United States? Because it's often I read, there's commentaries on YouTube where people are arguing that in US the prices for healthcare are unpredictable. So when you go to hospital and you don't know how much you will have to pay, is it true, or there is some kind of limits that people at least know how much they will be paying in the end? Because in Europe, it's of course you can sign up for extras and for private clinics, but in the state clinics, at least you can count on certain amount of money that you will have to spend. Say in Norway, it's approximately $200 that you spend on doctors from your own pocket, and the rest, if you go above that limit, and it is is doctor prescribed. Everything else is funded by the states, like basically from your own taxes. And what's it like in the US? Because sometimes when talking to Russians and talking to Europeans, they simply ask these questions. Is it true?
Well, in the US, it's a mess, and it's very basically the concept of universal health care not available. It is still very much a system. I'll call it a system, an oligarchic system. If you're wealthy and you're well connected, you got great health. You can get great health care. If you work for the government, you got a government pension. You got the health insurance. If you're working at McDonald's or one of the fast food restaurants, or even as a waiter or bartender, the odds is you're going to get health care slim and none. You're on your own. You just got to stay healthy. Now that brings back a whole nother issue of the obesity plague that is hitting the United States because of corporate, let's call it corporate food. The fast food industry, the proliferation of drinks that are laden with sugar, the number of folks that are just grossly obese. And, I'm not living in a glass house on this. I started looking at myself in the mirror, and you're in trouble when people say, "Oh, so when's the baby due?" Okay. So at that point you say, okay, I'm losing the gut. So I've dropped 21 pounds.
Very nice.
And but it's all coming off the gut. So this belly, I went from basketball size to it's more like bowling ball size, a little smaller than soccer ball now. My goal is golf ball size, or maybe marble.
I've lost 30 pounds since February myself, so I totally understand what you're saying about that. And as far as those costs, Yelena, I know I have a corporate health plan, but that doesn't really mean what it did in the 1970s. So oftentimes they say, "Oh, this is paid for," and then suddenly I get a bill, and then another bill, and then another bill, and another bill. So it's crazy to me. I have no idea. And anyway, it's not about socialism. Larry, I had a thought that healthcare should really be categorized as national security, because your population, their creative ability to contribute to the growth of the economy, that's actually your main resource.
Right.
So why not treat your people as if they are very important, which is what I see in Russia, which is what I see definitely in China. I think actually as an American, if I'm visiting in China, which, maybe I'll try this in October when I go back, there will be an opportunity to go. And I think you spend $40 and you can get a full physical that would cost thousands of dollars here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's just there.
And the importance of, let's put it this way, that we get back to a point where people eat right. They got the right kind of food. They're not slaves to processed food, and they're not slaves to sugar. Then
Right.
You've got a healthy society. Tucker Carlson the other day, he played a video from the Woodstock Festival in the summer of '69, and what you noticed as he scanned across the crowd, you didn't have a lot of fat people there. So this was still an era where people were not, grossly overweight. But, again, it's my generation that that's when McDonald's really came into being. And you started getting the cheeseburgers and the milkshakes, and then the cereal industry took over, the Fruit Loops, and a lot of other bad food, toxic food.
Honestly, this is what I do like about Bobby Kennedy in particular. He's put a spotlight on all of this.
Yeah.
And actually, people don't know this, but a lot of his ideas, the administration has kind of pushed down. They're not really letting it take root, and that's very unfortunate. And since you mentioned Tucker Carlson, let me ask you about your thoughts. Tucker, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Kent, I think even
Thomas Massey,
McGregor. Well, these gentlemen are all, ladies and gentlemen, and others. They're talking about yet another attempt at a third party. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe not strictly speaking as a party, but just doing something different.
Yeah, no, I think we're at a moment of, I'll call it, historical inflection, and I liken it to 1854. In 1854, it was a two-party system. Effectively, you had the Democrats, Andrew Jackson's party. They were, only had been around for about 15 years at that point, 20 years, and then the Whigs. And the problem for the Whigs is they had a big internal division over the question of slavery. Were they going to support slavery or not? And it split the party. And the reason I draw the parallel today with the Republicans, instead of slavery, it's Zionism. So Are we going to put Israel first, or are we going to put America first? That is really becoming sort of a battle line within the United States. And people that once, the ones you mentioned that were strong Trump supporters previously, no longer, and they're not the only ones. I don't know if I mentioned more than a week ago, Friday, I was interviewed by Mark McCluskey. I'm sure you remember.
Yes.
McCluskey he and his wife were standing outside their home in St. Louis during the Black Lives Matter riot, holding firearms and brandishing them. But he was involved with I think he was running the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania back in 2016. And he split with Trump over the entire issue of Zionism. Yeah. So it's not just isolated here and there. It's a phenomenon. And I could see, the combination of a party that really, it's not so much being anti-Israel as pro-United States, putting U.S. interests first, putting across the board that we're not wasting money in the Department of Defense building weapon systems we don't need, incredibly expensive weapon systems that are just nothing more than boondoggles, and instead focusing, using those resources to literally make America great.
Yeah. And I don't have any problem, by the way, with saying make America great again. I think greatness can be like, be a good neighbor, but not this. Actually, there was something I wanted to show you, was because you mentioned Israel. So talking about this whole thing, what caused Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, to demand that the IDF take out these, he said, Israeli terrorists. Those were his words that were being used against a Palestinian village.
Sure.
I mean, what to me, it's like everything is going not according to plan.
Yeah, no, well, the overreach of the Zionists and these settlers in particular, such that when you create a problem when it becomes a problem for Mike Huckabee, they've crossed the line. I mean, it's just incredible. I was shocked. I was happy, pleased, and shocked to see him say that. But it's still, it's just a reminder of how brutal and vicious these Zionists are. And finally, the line was crossed. I think this was a Palestinian Christian, not just a Palestinian Muslim. But that's why I say the wheels are coming off of Israel's hold on the United States.
See, that's what I think. I think we can't be stuck in this idea that everything is going to be one way or the other. I think we have to be open to the potential that, as bad as things get, or apparently are getting, we can't let our imagination run wild. I know that there was somebody else that Tucker interviewed recently she was talking about flock cameras and, an American version of the social credit score. But then you're talking here about the dollar system is crumbling. And, we know Scott Bessent was talking about a new Bretton Woods system. Well, you can't do that without some form of cooperation with other countries. We can't just impose anything. So, to you,
no. What I was just going to say is, when the U.S. foreign policy basically has become a policy of what can we do to piss off other countries, instead of saying what can we do to build relationships with other countries that they'll want to join with us, to cultivate relationships, not to cultivate enmity. But that's exactly what we're doing, cultivating enmity.
Right. So in that sense, the other nodes are picking up on that. Now, that is, I don't want to simply have like a doom and gloom thing, but the Trump administration was talking about a science, a science for a new golden age. That's on their website, a scientific recovery. And he did say properly in that article that America has endured a sustained period of deindustrialization. He talked about how American manufacturing employment peaked at 20 million workers in 79. It's just barely half of that, but it's a 35% decline because the population has gone up by 50%. And he had some executive orders to get nuclear power restarted in the United States. And I think 4 companies around what they call the small modular reactor design have gotten to the lowest level of criticality to just basically get more money. But I want to ask you about this. Is it real? Is this stuff enough? Because I did a little looking. Actually, do I have that book? Shoot, I don't have the book handy. I was looking at people like Henry Wallace, who wrote a book called 60 Million Jobs. And back in the day, long before I was around, we used to think in terms of like, if we're going to build something, say like 1,000 nuclear power plants or whatever, I think President Trump wants to quadruple our capacity. We would have to pour trillions of dollars into it today, which I only see China doing. So are you familiar with what the Trump administration is doing on this? Is it just kind of too little, too late? Is it fake?
Yeah.
Is it real?
Well, no, I don't think it's real. I think that, like when they supposedly offered, oh, we're going to build a nuclear power plant for Saudi Arabia. Hell, we may have built 2 in the last 25 years. Not exactly a track record you can go out and say, oh yeah, man, look how good we are. And you compare that with China and Russia, who, they've got an established track record for building.
They build, yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. Well, that is something else. Larry, I don't know if Yelena, do you have some other points to make? I know typically we go an hour. We've gone a little longer. Which I appreciate very much, your time. And do you have any closing words for us before we let you go and maybe enjoy your day?
Well, no, I think we're going to be seeing some Trump's flexibility. What he can do with the Middle East is going to be severely handcuffed by economic developments in the coming weeks. I think we're on the cusp of a major global financial crisis, and the United States thinks it's immune from it, and it's not.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, thank you very much for your time, Larry.
Hey, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks
absolutely.
a lot.
Okay.
And we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.
All right. And send me the link to the video so I can post it.
Yeah.
Will do,
Immediately.
absolutely.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, bye. Take care.
All right. That was a good discussion.
Yeah, and thanks to our audience on YouTube, guys. We really read all of your commentaries. Unfortunately, we didn't post all of them, but thanks for discussion. It is really interesting to read, and yes, we actually encourage all of the viewers to comment on all the platforms and to join our chats and join the discussion, because it's always nice to see feedback and to see people who are watching and who have their own opinion.
Yep. And by all means, please submit some questions there in the chats and the comments. So with that, Yelena,
Yes.
you take care. See you
You
later.
too. Thank you.
We are signing off.